and welcome to Tea Time with the Disc. My name is Taylor, and I'm your host.
And I'm Fajira, your co-host. And we are both program assistants here at the Disc, and this is our bi-weekly or monthly. We're still trying to figure out the mechanics of when we'll be posting these podcasts, where we focus on having conversations on important social justice issues and spilling the tea on today's controversy, because we know there's a lot of crazy-ish out there in the world right now that we could definitely take the time to spill our tea on.
Mm-hmm. And here at the Disc, we aim to challenge oppression by providing a safe space for engagement and dialogue. We focus on diversity and inclusion. So our focus here is to bring up different controversial topics and spread light on them for people out there who might not know some different things,
Right. And today we'll be talking to Liam Hawkyard about his experience of being a trans man. In honor of being an LGBTQ month, we feel like we want to bring up a topic of discussion about the trans community because we might not know enough information about it that we think we do. And there's a lot of misinformation out there that we need to check ourselves on.
We want to mention our knowledge of the trans community a little bit because although we do know a little bit, not everyone does. And most of our information can be taken from the media, such as shows as Pose or different celebrities, such as Caitlyn Jenner, who is very controversial, but we won't talk about that today. But they have different levels of privilege that most people don't have. And so that's why today we want to speak with someone who has went through the transition themselves and who has went through different struggles, spread light on the topic because we don't know as much as we could know, and I feel like everyone deserves a chance to get a different side of the perspective from someone who's actually went through it. And we just want to give a quick few statistics about the trans community, as trans people are reported to be 4 times as likely to live in poverty and more than twice as likely to face unemployment.
That's some crazy stuff that's kind of statistic. I feel like there's still a social stigma behind this trans community. Despite how progressive we are in comparison to the past, there is a stigma against the trans community, for sure, that we need to take a time to reevaluate.
Mm-hmm. Well, all right, y'all, it's time to spill the tea. But before we do, we want to share a little bit about our guest, Liam Hawkyard. Liam is a CSU East Bay alum who has worked with the Disc since 2014 and is passionate about advocating for the trans community social justice education. He grew up in Central Valley and can't believe how overpriced stone fruit is everywhere else. Liam loves science fiction, especially Babylon 5, music, Murder, She Wrote, hiking, geocaching, audiobooks, discovering weird places, and more. Liam is also an animal lover, and when asked whether he is a cat or dog person, he says he is a whatever is in my lap person. Welcome, Liam, to our podcast.
Thank you. I actually had my partner write that bio.
It's very
so it's probably more honest than I would be.
Now, how about we get started in some of these questions, shall we?
Sounds great.
So the first question is, when was the first time you realized that you were trans, and when did you begin your transition?
So the first time I realized I was trans was when I was in college. I think I was a sophomore when I first came out to myself, but I started to really come to terms with the idea that this is a part of my identity when I went to a women's college in the Bay Area, actually Mills College, because that was really the first time I was exposed to the trans community. And when I was in high school, I came out as a lesbian because I was always aware that I wasn't cis, and I knew that I was attracted to femme-presenting folks, and so I had come out and was waving my pride flag and all that stuff. And actually, when I was in high school, I started a GSA, and we worked with the University Pride Group on the college campus in our area to kind of find community and stuff like that. And that was the first time I'd ever met a trans person. I'd heard the word transsexual and things like that, but I didn't really know what it meant to be trans. I'd only seen trans people represented in things like Silence of the Lambs, Ace Ventura, really terrible things where it's just horrible representations. And so, I definitely remember thinking when I was younger, oh, am I like that? Like, do I want to be a boy instead of a girl? And it was really scary because that seemed like, a terrible way to walk through the world. Like when you see things like Buffalo Bill being like the only exposure you had to the community, right? Someone who wears other people's skin as a dress.
For sure.
So like that really made it, the idea of being trans, scary to me.
For sure.
And then when, I started to actually meet people that were trans, like really when I was at Mills and like at this women's college, I was like, oh, like this is what it means to be trans. And it really started to click with my experiences growing up and how I felt about myself and my identity. When I was a kid growing up, I always said like, oh, I'm just a kid. I'm not a girl. I'm just a kid. And I would have, teachers correct me and tell me like, oh, I'm a girl. Like I have this vivid memory of when I was in kindergarten, the teacher asked me, or told us all to get in a boys line and a girls line. And I said, where do the kids line up? And then, of course, the teacher told me to get my ass in the girls line. So, like I always was presenting this way kind of, but I definitely was kind of shamed away from it. Like I was called things like she-male and made fun of and picked on. And so actually when I was in, going into high school, I intentionally started presenting much more femme because I was trying to fit in it. And I thought maybe I'm just not doing this woman thing right. Maybe that's why I'm so unhappy with it. So like I kind of tried to push myself into this box after having so many people kind of like push down my spirit, and then finally, like after I, really experienced like what it meant to be, or really witnessed what it meant to be trans, then I was kind of able to come to terms with it and really start to, live as my whole self.
Mm-hmm. And when you started feeling as your whole self, when did you start to feel the most control over your transition?
Well, I mean, I don't really know that you ever feel like you have control of your transition specifically, because like with your social transition, it's this constant battle of asserting this is who I am. And sometimes people are like, yeah, okay. And then other times people are like, no, you're not a man. Or I'm going to use your dead name, which is the name that, you're not your chosen name, right? So when trans people socially transition, they will pick a new name for themselves sometimes. Not all folks do. Some people just keep their birth name. So when you call a trans person who has a preferred or chosen name by their birth name, it's called dead naming them. So like some people will just be like, no, I'm going to call you by this name, even though I know it's, makes you feel horrible.
Right.
Or I'm going to misgender you. So like, that's not really in your control. What is in your control is, am I going to continue to hang out with this person or have this person in my life, which is one of the reasons why chosen family is such a big thing for the trans community and the queer community, because it's that process of finding these people that see you for who you are and appreciate that, and so like that's not necessarily in your control, and it, to some extent neither is the medical thing, medically transitioning, because it's a hard system to navigate. Like there are more resources now, but it's still very hard. It's like hard to find a doctor that knows anything about the trans community and it's going to support you through a transition. And it's not just about getting on hormones or getting a referral for a surgery or having a doctor that will advocate for you through, like when you're working with your health insurance. It's like if you get sick, just in general, like you want a doctor that's going to treat you humanely, right? Like that's so huge. And it's really hard to find one. When I first started my medical transition, I ended up cold calling doctors and endocrinologists to try and find someone that, wasn't a complete transphobe. Because like the doctor I had growing up in high school, like he was the kind of doctor that wouldn't prescribe you birth control because he didn't think you should be having sex. So it's like, he's not going to help me transition,
Right.
What I mean? So it was like really hard to find that. And it's terrible that you would have to resort to that, just like cold calling and like outing yourself, and so like I'd call him up and then I'd be like, hey, I'm trans, like, does your doctor have any other trans patients, or have they worked with trans folks before? And a lot of times they would either get kind of creeped out or discuss it, or they wouldn't even know what I was talking about. And finally, I was able to find one. And so it's very hard to feel like you have control over the situation. I think I started to feel like I had more control over my transition as I like grew more confident and like started getting further out of the unknown. So like when I connected with like community elders or people that had gone through it before me, or even at the same time as me. I had a friend who started, they weren't a trans man, but they started hormones the month after I did. And that was such a huge thing for me, just having someone else I could talk to about it. Because your body is doing weird things. Like it's changing all the time. And it's really hard to feel like you have your feet underneath you. And so just having someone else to talk to about it and be like, okay, so this is normal, gonna be okay. Like that really makes you feel
having
like
that support.
Yeah, and just like kind of getting in the practice of learning how to navigate the medical world and how to be more like confident in yourself and start living up to your own ideas of like what it means to, take on the social roles that you want to, and not so much living up to other folks' ideals of what that may be.
I feel like it's like it's not only a learning process for other people, but it's a learning process for you too, like this is all like for you, like it's new for you, this whole coming to terms with being trans rather than being just gay. I think it's understanding, like you need to take that time to realize that I'm processing this, other people are processing this. It's a whole, it's a journey and it's experience. So during that process, continue.
I was gonna say it takes a long, like you're like the way I kind of describe like finding out you're trans to people is like you have built up this fog glass that prevents you from being able to see like your identity, or like this foggy coating over the mirror. So it's really hard to even see your self-identity or understand like how you need to relate to the world or go through the world, and that fog is like socialization, right? We're constantly told this is how we need to be. So it's like until you kind of shatter that glass or you start to even unpack like what your identity is, you haven't even had the opportunity to do that. So it's like you're getting a late start on an already lifelong process.
For sure. I feel like you mentioning, the first obstacle is yourself, trying to come to terms with yourself and taking that time to realize is super important for you to start that journey. During that journey, were you ever worried or did you have any concerns of how your peers or people around you would act?
I definitely had concerns about how like people I didn't know were going to act. When I started medically transitioning and socially transitioning, I worked at Dollar Tree. I was a cashier at first, and then I got promoted to an assistant manager. And I was really worried, like when you're transitioning, it's not like when I came out as a lesbian when I was in high school, because then it's like, well, I don't have to tell people that I'm a lesbian. But when I started transitioning, it's like my voice started to drop. I started getting body hair everywhere, and I started binding. So there were very obvious changes that were happening. And so I was really worried about how these people that I didn't know were going to respond to it. Like I didn't know if the guy who came in, to Dollar Tree every night at 7:30 to get his Hot Pocket, I didn't know if he was a transphobe. Like I didn't know how he was going to respond, if he might be violent. And it made me really concerned. Like, we definitely had some customers that were, that had a really short fuse. And I was scared about how they were going to, react to it and how they were going to treat me. So that was really scary. And then, also thinking about like how like professors were going to treat me. Like every semester I had to basically out myself until I got my name changed, because on the roster it would have my birth name, and I obviously didn't look like what my birth name was. And I did have this time where I had emailed the professor in advance to say, hey, just so you know, like this is what my name is, here's my net ID, that's not what I go by, and I don't look like like I'm a trans man, basically. And he responded, he was like, I don't see why that's important. And he had told everyone that you have to be present for a roll call during the first day, otherwise you're going to get dropped from the class, which is why I told him so he would change the roster. And then when he didn't change the roster, and then when he called my name, I raised my hand, I said, that's me. He didn't believe me, and I had to tell him, I sent you an email about it. And so it's like, yeah, this is why I told you, so that was really terrible, because it was a class in front of like 80 people, and I didn't know like how they were going to react. And so like those things were definitely scary. But as I like became more confident, like I got tired of when I started transitioning, I got to a point where I didn't want to I wanted to live my life as I needed to live it, so that I could be happy and I could have a wholesome life. And so, for people that I just came across, or people that were like in my friends group, if they weren't going to treat me right or respect me, then they just weren't going to be in my life, So it's definitely scarier when it's people you don't know anything about, or people that you can't avoid, like that professor was always going to be, my professor for the rest of that semester, unless I dropped the class. And so that's not really in my control. So I think those were definitely the scarier situations where you didn't have control necessarily over how your identity was kind of being revealed, or how you were allowed to exist in the space.
And how did you feel like your mindset changed throughout your transition?
I definitely like changed the way I thought about like what it means to be a man or masculine. Like I always hung out with boys when I was growing up, and so I thought I understood men, but it wasn't until I started getting read as male, like as like now most people don't know I'm trans unless I tell them. They just think I'm like some cis dude or something. Like the way men talk to me now is crazy. Like you would not believe what some men say.
How different? Like what do you mean? Like how different?
I cannot tell you the things I've heard, but it's like crazy. Like, there really is a boys club. And like, so I really learned a lot about like, what does it mean to be socialized as male? Because I didn't have that experience. I was socialized as female. So I had no understanding of what that meant. And it's really made me think critically about like what patriarchy does to young men. And it's awful, like it's harmful. And so I don't want to recreate those cycles of harm, and so it's really made me think critically about what it means to be the kind of man I want to be, and also what it means to be a trans man, because I don't want to just be a man. Like my trans identity is really important to me. I fought for it. Like I don't want to not be trans, like there are definitely some folks who transition and then they're like, okay, I'm not trans anymore. I'm done. I transitioned. And I've had a lot of cis family members that think that too. They think, oh, well, Liam, you had top surgery, so you're not trans anymore. You're just a man now, right? But I don't want to be. Like, I worked really hard to like be comfortable and okay with myself. And I feel like I've fought for my trans identity and experience. And I want to hold on to that. Like, it makes me who I am. I don't want to just, be like a cis man, My identity is important to me.
Yeah. But we just want to ask if you could give any few words of advice towards the young folks who can't find the support from their family and friends and don't know where to go.
I would say the first thing to do is connect with elders, and I think I've mentioned that earlier, but meeting other folks who are trans or queer that are older and have gone through the things that you're currently navigating is so huge. Like one of the things that's so stressful about being trans or like being queer is this uncertainty. Like, how am I going to navigate the professional world? How am I going to navigate like finding an apartment when like people will just say no, if you're obviously trans, or like if you're non-binary, right? Even though we have protections against that, it's one of those things where it still happens. So it's really hard to like navigate that and just like kind of the everyday. And like when you think about like when you go to career fairs or panels, like they very seldom talk about what it means to navigate that, professional spheres like as trans or queer, but especially as trans, right? Because you don't necessarily have to reveal like if you're gay, lesbian, or queer, but you kind of can't avoid it when you're filling out like HR paperwork if they need to know any other name that you've had in the past 10 years for a background check or something like that, right? And also practice navigating the medical sphere, I guess. I don't know how you would say that, but you know, like you're going to rely like on doctors and healthcare providers for the rest of your life. And it's really, really hard to find folks that are trans competent. And this is beyond just like, I'm not talking about medically transitioning, because that's really hard to navigate for sure. But like, you're always going to need doctors. Like, you know, you're going to need to see one if you get hospitalized, or like to get like, you know, your flu shot, or if like you need some other assistant, you need to be able to trust and rely on your doctor. And it's really hard to figure out how to find one that's not transphobic or that's trans competent, right? So it's not even just, are they tolerant of you? Do they know what it means to treat a trans person? Do they know how your hormone replacement therapy is going to interact with these other medications? Do they know how that's going to affect your aging? Do they know like how frequently you should be screened for certain cancers? That's really important. That directly affects your well-being. And if you don't have a doctor that understands that, you know, that's putting your health in jeopardy. And for me, it's something that was important to learn, is that I don't have to stick with a doctor that I don't like or I don't feel comfortable with. I had a doctor that I didn't like, but I felt like he was an authority figure. So I felt like I just had to kind of suck it up. And, you know, then someone pointed out to me, like, you can go to another doctor. Like, you could find someone else. You don't have to stick with them. They're taking your money, you know, and your benefits. So like, you can shop around and find someone that really makes you feel comfortable going to them when you need help. Because if you don't feel comfortable with your doctor, like, how are you going to, you know, be able to get through the world comfortably and healthy? So I think that one's really huge. And that's like a huge barrier that so many trans people face. Like, there are plenty of people that have gotten turned away from doctors or hospitals for treatment just because they're trans. So it's something that like, it directly affects the health and well-being of our community. And that's not even talking about like trans people who don't even have access to healthcare, right? Because they can't get jobs, or they're struggling with homelessness, houselessness. Like, it is so important for, like, so many nonprofits are working really hard to, you know, address the health needs of our community, and we're really struggling with it, you know? So it's like this huge issue. It's like not only finding doctors that are health competent, but it's getting people to a place where they can access healthcare at all. So I think, you know, people don't necessarily have that competency or that experience if they don't have like a parent or a guardian that can tell you how to navigate that, you know? So that's something that's uniquely challenging for the LGBTQ plus community, but especially the trans community, which is, again, why I say you need to connect with elders, because they're going to help you get through that, or just other community members in general. Like, that's huge.
Well, I want to give a warm thank you to you, Liam, for joining us today at our first episode of Tea Time with the Disc. So let's give a round of applause.
Thank you.
All the people who are watching today.
Oh, yes, thank you. And please follow our social media, CSUEB_disc on Instagram. If you have any ideas for any future topics that you would like us to talk about, please submit it there and we'll give it a check out. And yeah, we're signing off, and we will see you on the next episode. Thanks.
Stay safe, y'all.
Stay
Bye.
safe.